to you.
Hello, it's 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. in Strasbourg, and with you are Alexander Tulkanov and Leticia Dimanche from the Council of Europe with this webinar online series, which helps you to understand the perspective of the Council of Europe on a variety of topics related to the digital transformation of society with the focus on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Today's webinar will be focused specifically on the interplay between the human rights and the use of service robots, which tend to augment or replace the human-to-human interaction. And let me pass the floor to Leticia to introduce our experts.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will start by shortly presenting our today's speaker. The first one will be Susan Biller. She's General Secretary of the International Federation of Robotics. The second one will be Hiroaki Kitano, which is the President and CEO of Sony Computer Science Laboratories and CEO of Sony AI Incorporation. The third speaker will be Stephen Hu, which is attorney and shareholder at the Silicon Valley Law Group and chair of the American Bar Association Artificial Intelligence and Robotic National Institute. And the final speaker will be Amy van Weinsberg. She's Alexander von Humboldt Professor for Applied Ethics of AI, University of Bonn, and President of the Foundation for Responsible Robotics.
And we invite you to use the chat function to ask questions during the event. And if we have some polls, please do participate. And for the opening of this webinar, we give the floor now to the representatives of the Council of Europe, and more specifically to Jan Kleijsen, Director, Information Society Action Against Crime, and Claudia Luciani, Director, Human Dignity, Equality and Governance. Please, Jan, take the floor.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you also, Leticia, for your introduction. A warm welcome to all of you this afternoon to this webinar, which is held in the margin of the Council of Europe's Ad-Hoc Committees on Artificial Intelligence 5th plenary meeting, which started this morning. The Ad-Hoc Committee, or CAHAI as it is better known, has the mandate to assess the feasibility and identify the elements of possible legal instruments that address the design, development and use of artificial intelligence with an impact on human rights, rule of law and democracy. And intelligent service robots, which is the subject of today's webinar, are a prominent example where AI applications can have a direct impact on human rights. As opposed to industrial robots, service robots operate in social contexts. They increase or replace human-to-human interaction. Sometimes they're also referred to as embodied AI, and they use sophisticated technology, high-end computer vision, speech recognition, and in some areas, they can mimic or even outperform human beings. At the same time, it's easy to understand that in social contexts, they collect a lot of sensitive information, and perhaps not always with consent or the full awareness of the people with whom they interact, whose information is being recorded and can be transferred or processed. A lot of data, therefore, underlines the use and the design of these service robots. To what extent do they respect the operators' obligations to respect privacy? To what extent do they respect the human rights of the people they interact with on a daily basis? These and other questions will be answered by our 4 eminent experts, and I'm really happy they're able to join us here. Without further ado, I give the floor to Claudia, and I look forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, and a warm welcome from my side as well. And let me take this further with some questions and examples about human dignity. Some service robots are promoted, for example, for use in elder care or for adult entertainment. This raises the question whether and to what extent such applications are compatible with respect for human dignity, and whether the person's behavior and attitude towards robots in these scenarios may also translate into his or her behavior towards other humans. Furthermore, service robots may also come with remote control and remote disabling functionality. This functionality may not be necessarily evident to the people using the robots until the robots are shut down or their behavior is otherwise affected by someone other than its user. For example, the company which may have rented out the robot may decide to disable it at the most inconvenient moment due to, for example, non-payment of a subscription fee. Or the robot may become a target of hacking by criminals. You see how many examples we have. And this raises some basic fundamental human rights issues, be it information, transparency obligations, or perhaps even property, consumer and core social rights. We hope that this webinar will help you to better navigate these types of human rights related issues, thanks to our brilliant experts today, and perhaps take more informed decisions for yourself and for those you represent when dealing with intelligent service robots and AI systems more generally. So let's hear it from the experts.
Thank you to our director, Jan Clayton and Claudia Luciani for this opening word. And I will start by giving the floor to Suzanne Biller, our first speaker. Her presentation is video recorded.
It's a great pleasure to speak at this webinar on robots and artificial intelligence and their impact on human rights. Before addressing the economic and societal aspects of the service robots, I would shortly go to the definition, and let me shortly show you some slides to back that up. So robots are, according to the ISO definition, actuated mechanisms, so they are really physical systems. They should have a certain degree of autonomy, and they are doing things to perform an intended task. That's the three most important parts of the robot definition, whereas AI is seen as pure software or algorithms. They are designed by humans, but they are also working to achieve a given goal. There's a certain overlap between robots and AI. Some people call it embodied AI. We'd rather address it as smart or advanced robots. And why do we need robots at all? I tried to sort the benefits from going for the pure company benefits to the benefits of the individuals to the more greater societal benefits. So companies use robots to be able to produce large quantity of products or also services, guaranteeing their competitiveness. They can achieve higher throughput and more precision. For us as individuals, we get better quality of products and services. They make products more affordable for us. They guarantee for the safety and quality of work. So it's a benefit for those that work in more challenging environments. And overall, they support a higher standard of living. And in the bigger picture, they can support us in overcoming a lack of skilled labor that many industries and also services sectors face due to the demographic shift we are facing in the society. And they also support the resource and energy efficiency, which is also one of the big societal goals of our days. Robots and AI, what are they for? So we should not ever forget to see robots as tools to help and serve us as humans. And robots are never autonomous like humans. They are programmed for a certain task and purpose. AI can both help companies to optimize robots and process performance, and they also enable robots to sense and respond to their environment, which is very important for the service robotics sector especially. We differentiate between different types of robots. Industrial robots are used in closed manufacturing environments, for example, for automotive or electronics manufacturing. Then we see the group of professional service. They are used in logistics, inspection of plants, in agriculture, but also for personal information and guidance, for healthcare, and for professional cleaning. And then the third and also very large group is the service robots for private use. They are used for domestic purposes, like lawn mowing, vacuum cleaning, pool cleaning, and so on. They're used in entertainment, as toys, but also for educational purposes. And they can also be used in elderly care and assistance. These three groups can be clustered into areas. One, where there is no contact or only contact to trained personnel. And the other group, which is more the professional service robots and all the private service robots, they are in contact with untrained or uninformed persons. And that makes a great difference, not only for safety, but also if you're looking at privacy aspects, for example. I totally look at the market figures. If you're looking at the industrial robots world, we are looking at about 376 industrial robots being installed per year. So that number has been slightly decreasing in the past years. We are talking about roughly 2.7 billion industrial robots being used in the manufacturing floors around the world. So the actual figure is not that high. If we are looking at the service robotics markets, I said we are looking at the domestic market. On one hand, that has a lower value, but a much higher unit count. So we're basically at IFR counting the units of robots sold. So we're speaking about 23 million industrial robots being used in being newly used in 2019. Whereas we're having only 173,000 new professional service robots. But the professional service robot value is about double the value of the domestic, as there are some more expensive robot systems involved. Going a bit more into the detail, we see that service robots for domestic and personal use, the largest share is for domestic tasks like cleaning, lawn mowing, and so on, what I mentioned before. And the share of elderly and handicap assistance is really negligible at the moment, but it shows a great growth potential with 46% annually over the next 4 years. If we are looking at the professional used service robots, the by far largest share is logistics. That's, for example, for e-commerce applications. So that's all. Most of them are also used in a trained and closed personnel, but they can also be used, of course, to run on the streets, for example, for delivering groceries to people at home. The largest growing areas is public environment, that's information and guidance robots being used in shops, in retail, but also in museums and on public places. And also very much growing is the professional cleaning robots. So cleaning office building, cleaning train stations, cleaning airports, or cleaning trade fair halls, for example. And then, as I said, we are also talking about plant inspection and maintenance. We are talking about agricultural applications, exoskeletons, and medical applications. So they are more going to the being closer used to untrained personnel. I'd like to quote Paul Dougherty and James Wilson. They said AI has a really potential to rehumanize work and giving us more time to be human rather than using our time to work like machines. So breaking that down, we have a huge potential to reimagine work processes. The humans can complement machines, and AI actually amplifies our human potential. So it's not about speeding up work tasks, but really rethinking our work processes, making machines do what they are good at, and giving humans more time for their strengths, living out their strengths and their purely human properties and potentials. This can have a positive impact on our personal lives and society. I mentioned that in creative clips earlier. It can make services affordable if we are thinking about nursery homes, for example, where there's a lot of heavy and hard and challenging tasks, and also a lot of administrative burdens. So if we can free the nurses to really do the human-to-human stuff, where they need the empathy, the human empathy, and so on. So it will be also easier for people to get into or to afford proper nurse care. It also can give people a feeling of independence. For example, elderly people being able to stay home longer, and also impaired people that can do things on their own. We are providing more flexible service with professional service robots, and overall in sum, it has a huge potential to support our high standard of living. Of course, the technology has also their risk. There is a certain risk of discrimination or bias, especially in the programming, if algorithms are used for decision making. So you have to be very careful about that. So if algorithms decide who gets to the universities or who can climb the property ladder, that's very tricky, and we have to really make sure that there's no bias in the data behind or the algorithms taking those decisions. If you're talking about service robots, I would say we need to carefully review who can get access to service robots. Right now, there are high costs involved, so there might be a certain discrimination on the access to the technology. There can also be a risk of harming the privacy and personal rights. Robots do get to properly work. They, as I have mentioned before, they're using sensors to sense their environment. Of course, that can be used in a negative way to collect a lot of data. It's a lot of personal data involved, and robots also invading our private sphere. If a user telepresence robot at home, for example, the robot can of course see everything at home, so we have to really make sure that there is no misuse. And special attention should especially be paid if robots are used in particular vulnerable groups. I mentioned the elderly. I would also like to point out the children or impaired who cannot really properly analyze what's going on and decide for themselves. So that should be paid special attention. And also, if the robots are used in public spaces, we need to make sure that they don't vulnerate privacy. We probably need to discuss commercial use versus commercial use versus personal use. We know that people are less reluctant to share data if they are in personal use. If we think about using our smartphones, if we have some commercial applications, we're a bit more critical. So if robots are used at work, we might be less willing to share our data. Overall, we shouldn't forget machine learning systems are set up by people, and also robots are programmed by people. So there is a certain personal factor involved, but we must make sure that they're really, so we need to identify the critical applications and be sure that in those critical applications, anti-discrimination mechanisms are set in place, and also privacy protection and protection of personal rights. But we also need to make sure that the accessibility of technology is there, and we do not set our society as disadvantaged if we harm or if we restrict too much of the technology. Thank you very much for your attention.
And many thanks to Mrs. Biller, which have done an interesting presentation, which illustrates also the importance of the distinction between personal and professional service robotic, which leads to different kind of consequences for a human being. And now I will give the floor to Hiro Akikitano, which will present the technological aspects of this question. Thank you.
Well, hello. Thank you very much. Hello. Okay, let me start. I think like Suzanne covered a very broad range of issues already. So I think like I'll make my presentation relatively short and to the point. I think when you say service robot, I think it means like a relatively broad area. And we can actually partitions, classify the service robot into the several different aspect based on the kind of use case or like a kind of technology that is required. Let me share a little bit of the slide here. Is if you look at the classify the use case in terms of the openness of the environment, whether what is operating, which is like factory automation, the industrial robot is like a closed and a very structured environment. And as opposed to the autonomous driving, which is in a city, for example, is the fully open environment and unstructured environment. And you never able to predict what will going to happen in the next moment. And so this is the classification based on the structure level of the structured environment and also like openness of environment. And then the vertical axis, I put it is the task complexity. So if the robot is the supposed to do the single task or like a multiple task, and whether the multiple tasks can be predefined or have to make a dynamical decision of which tasks to be executed. So like as we go up, then things will be more complicated. Okay, so like if you look at this, two dimensions, like industrial robotics is basically for the closed environment and a very structured environment, and you can really predict what will going to happen. And even if you have like like to have machine to do the multiple tasks, you can sort of pre-program it. You don't really have to have a local decision making. And even if a robot have decision making, it will be pre-programmed decision making. If this happens, I can do this, and this happen, do this. And of course, everyone in the environment, the professional, as I mentioned, this is really structured, controlled environment. And I don't think we have much of the problem with this. This has been widely used worldwide for the manufacturing. Okay. Now the issue is like a middle to the right part. That is the semi-structured environment, which is like a part of the home environment or like a kitchen or a hospital, and the environment is not completely open, but like it's not entirely structured like in a factory. So like we can pre-define some kind of area that the robot may be operating, and there are reasonable knowledge of people around, and you can expect not entirely, but like pretty much what we're going to happen in that environment. Like it cannot be 100% predictable. There are unpredictable things happening. So that is the kind of environment robotic system can be operate today. And but at the same time, if you want to have a robot do the multiple things in this environment, this is going to be extremely difficult. So the only robot which is practically deployed at this moment for this environment is the home cleaning robot. That is single task, and you can sort of define the environment. It's not entirely structured, but like you can expect like this cleaning robot to go through the floor, but it's not going to climb up and down the stairways. So there are environment which you can kind of define it as a sort of closed environment. You can expect what to happen. And if you want to bring the robot to the second floor or third floor, you have to just bring it rather than expect the robot to just climb up and down. So like we can dynamically define the environment in a semi-closed environment and get it go. So I think this is the level of the technology today. And even that environment, if you want to have like a more complex task, like a dynamical multitask, things are going to be extremely difficult. Okay. The other example of the single task environment in a structured, semi-structured environment is some cooking robot. A relatively simple one, like fried rice robot, or like say yakitori robot, or whatever that you do, like simple cooking. And because like a kitchen is a semi-structured environment, and if you give like a specific task or specific space where the robot is operating and they give you a specific task, you might need a little bit of decision making. Depends on how well the cooking is proceeding. But like still, like you can predict, and then that you can actually train the robot by the deep learning or whatever it is to cope with a certain level of deviations in what's in the situation, but still you don't really have to interact with a completely unknown environment or unexpected incident. So this is the area that you can actually push with the technology today, and then bringing that to the multitask will be really challenging. But that really depends on how you can define the environment to be more structured and more well-defined. So then we can actually have a little bit of a multi-task robotic system. Of course, in that case, a cost of hardware will going to be the issue. And also a development of software to cope with that, we're going to be well more complicated. Okay, and now the challenge is, for open environment, unstructured environment, like driving around the cities, like autonomous driving is very challenging because the environment is unstructured and open-ended, and you never know what happens. Of course, you can predict, but at the same time, in this environment, there are two cases. One is if you're driving a highway, if you're driving a city. In the highway, still have unexpected things happen, but it's relatively more structured as opposed to the city environment. So a highway, autonomous driving in the highway, it's getting more practical, but a city environment is very challenging because of the complexity of the environment. Okay, now the real challenge is, can we build any robotic system which requires dynamical decision making and then still the multitask in this kind of environment? It's really challenging. Okay, now with this, when you have a structured environment which is relatively predictable, you don't really need autonomy. You need automation in that case. Then you have a more open-ended environment and the complex task, multitask, for example. Then you need more autonomy because in a situation the robot may encounter may not be predictable, or probably remote control because of the network latency may not be fast enough to cope with unexpected situations. So a robot may have to make decisions by its own on the spot, on the edge side. So then you require some more autonomy. So it's a very, the interesting things here is if you go to the open environment, which is more complicated, and then you need a more autonomy on the robotic side and edge side decision making, rather than the human actually identify the problem and then make a decision to command the robotic system. So I think we can grade the risk, grade the technical requirement, and then come up with the solutions. Either that's a regulatory means or technical means, probably in a combination of these. But I think when you say service robotics, we have to be more precise and then cope with the available technology today. And I think I'm gonna stop here. I think I want to save more for the interactive discussion later. But I think when you say the message is, when you say the robotics in the real world, that we can actually classify into the multiple things. It depends on the openness of environment and the task complexity.
Many thanks, Dr. Kitano, for this presentation, which I think show and point out where the actual issues related to service robotic are, and also to raise the importance of the risks related to this technology, which is an important question also for the CAHAI today and during this plenary.
And by the way, I wanted to pay attention to the results of or at least the current result of the poll, which we have still running, regarding the question of, do you see service robots as an area with sufficient regulation today? And so far we have 9 people and 90% of voters saying that we might still need some more additional adapted regulation in that field, and 1 person, 1 vote, 10% says that we actually would not might be needing the new regulation specifically for the service robotics. And speaking of regulation, it is good that we have also with us, unfortunately on recording, but still with us, Stephen Wu, who is an expert on also regulation and law more generally. So let me give the floor, the stage for Stephen Wu, who is the attorney and shareholder of Silicon Valley Law Group, a highly experienced lawyer who has dealt a lot with the issues of AI and robotics in terms of his clients and his work. So let us maybe show the recording.
Hello, my name is Steve Wu. I'm a shareholder at Silicon Valley Law Group in San Jose, California in the United States. I'm here to talk with you today about service robots, privacy, and some of the legal issues that I see as an American lawyer in dealing with artificial intelligence and robotics in my day-to-day practice. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your conference, and I am hopeful that I can provide you with a perspective from American law and how an American lawyer would see issues having to do with service care robots, especially for robots that help with the elder care. I believe that artificial intelligence and robotics will change the world more than any other technologies in human history. When I give talks about artificial intelligence and robotics, I mention 4 key principles associated with AI and robotics. First, AI and robotics are here and will continue to develop over time in an exponential fashion. We will have such great progress in AI and robotics in the upcoming decades that it will be difficult to adjust to the changes that we will be experiencing. The second principle that I mentioned is that there will be great consequences, both positive and negative, having to do with the development and deployment of artificial intelligence and robotics. The third principle is, as a result of these dramatic positive and negative changes, that we will have many legal issues associated with the use of artificial intelligence and robotics. And elder care robots are no exception to that. And the fourth key principle that I mentioned is that artificial intelligence and robotics is something that all of us as concerned citizens, as lawyers, as people involved with human rights and with the public policy initiatives in our respective nations, that all of us play a role in helping to develop and deploy ethical, compliant, and safe technologies so that we can protect the public and maintain rights. So with that, let's focus on service robots in the elder care field and talk about some of the issues that I see as an American lawyer associated with them. And I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of overlap between what you're looking at the Council of Europe and what we're looking at in the United States, although the focus might be a little bit different for each of us. As an American lawyer, I think about 5 key issues in my day-to-day practice associated with robotics. One is compliance. So there are many rules having to do with robotics, both having to do with connected devices as Internet of Things devices, as they surely will be, most of them probably, and also privacy and security rules and regulations that apply to the use of robotics. The second is transactions. Many of my clients are vendors who are offering these solutions, and we have to figure out ways of selling these solutions with contracts that fairly allocate liability between purchaser and vendor. The third piece is dispute resolution. We will have liability associated with these devices, and we will need to be able to defend our clients' interests in court proceedings. The fourth aspect is incident response. And today what that means is a lot of concern about data breaches. Private information, personal data is being collected by these devices, which may be compromised by a security breach. And we also have the possibility of violating laws relating to principles such as transparency, giving proper notice, obtaining consents, and the like. And finally, I work on the governance of artificial intelligence and robotics technology. And what that means today is policies and procedures, mostly focused on data privacy and data security, but in the future, we'll be focusing on artificial intelligence or robotics specific policies. And some of the data protection impact analyses that we talk about under the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, I believe, will translate into things like artificial intelligence impact assessments or robotics impact assessments, trying to figure out what is the impact of these technologies before they go to market. So with service robots and some of the issues that I'm thinking about, I consider there's some threats that we have to consider. And with the legal issues that I face day to day with my law practice, I'm looking at things like issues of what happens if it doesn't work. So with an elder care system, I mean, I'm thinking about maybe different types of these elder care systems. One may be telepresence robots, so that you could have sort of video conferencing and allowing someone to remotely control a robot in the presence of an elder to be able to check in on an elder person. The second kind that I'm thinking about would be maybe helping elders move about their home environments so that they can get in and out of bed, or go to the kitchen, or do other functions that they have to do within the home. And the third kind would be social robots, which are trying to provide emotional support. Some of these may be mascot-like characters that provide entertainment or conversation. And you can think of it maybe a robot with a chatbot type of function on it. But others are like they look like stuffed animals that elders can hold and provide comfort, almost like a substitute for a regular animal pet. So those are the range of robots that I think of, and I'm sure that there are many, many others that we can think of, but those would be good places to start in our discussion today. But what are some of the threats that I see as an American lawyer? I mean, the first one, as I mentioned, is what happens if the technology doesn't work? If a purchaser purchases a product that's supposed to do certain things, and it doesn't do what it is claimed, then there could be liability associated with the contract not being fulfilled. And if we had contracts for purchases of large quantities of these devices, the purchaser might have some claims against the seller for not meeting the standards to make it work as it was advertised, and individual consumers would have the same types of claims on an individual basis. Some of the things that I think about to try to avoid these kinds of problems include standards, testing, due diligence, and having proper contractual allocation when we represent vendors. The second threat that I see is accidents. You could have robots that try to lift elder folk that end up tipping over or dropping the elder person. So there will inevitably be accidents with the robots associated with moving elders around the home or lifting them out of bed. And with that, there are product liability claims. And we try to think about, was the manufacturer of this product reasonable in the way that it created its product? And we also have strict liability law, which focuses on, was there a defect in the product that caused a harm? All of these claims will have to be adjudicated. The fourth piece is, or the third piece, I'm sorry, is data breaches. So these devices will be collecting a lot of information. And when they're collecting personal data, they may have cameras and sensors and microphones. And that personal data might be collected somewhere. Maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's on the device. And with that, there's the possibility that some of that data might leak or be compromised in some way. And it may be someone who wants to attack the device or attack the elder user, or it could be trying to monetize this data. So risks of data breaches are a problem. And the governance of that information that's being collected is going to be important. There should be policies and procedures by the vendor or by the service providers servicing those robots to make sure that the data is collected in a way that's appropriate, that there's proper notice and disclosure to the elder folk or to those who are caring for them, like a guardian or conservator, and that there's an understanding about how that data will be used, with whom it will be shared, and how that data could be fixed if it is out of date or needs to be corrected. And there are problems associated with collecting too much data. There's the problem of collecting human voices, and if there's a recording, what does it happen to be? There are issues associated with the collection, use, and sharing of information, and we need to make sure that the privacy policies reflect the principles of privacy. In the United States now, we have 2 states, California and Virginia, that have general privacy laws governing personal data that's being collected from individuals in those states, and that's part of our compliance landscape now. If I could focus on 3 issues that I've been dealing with lately, it's the question about the limitation of purpose. If you collect data from a elder care robot for one purpose, It should not be used for another purpose without consent, unless there are other lawful bases for using that information. The second one is minimizing the amount of data collected and also keeping it only for so long. And collecting of human voices is an example of that, where if an Internet of Things connected elder care robot is collecting human voice, could that information be subpoenaed? What is being used with that human voice recording? What is it being used for? And are humans listening to it? All of these implicate privacy issues, I think, in the United States. And the third is data subject rights, which under California and Virginia law, you have certain rights of deletion, and companies who are operating elder care robots are going to have to handle data subject access rights, and individual requests for deletion or modification of data. So those are some of the key issues that are interesting me now as a lawyer. My website is airoboticslaw.com, and I would be most happy to respond to you and collaborate with you on initiatives with the Council of Europe. Thank you so much for having me.
And many thanks to Mr. Hu for his presentation, which highlighting well through concrete legal issues such as liability and privacy, the importance of a appropriate regulation, helping developing safe technologies and respecting human rights, also underlining the important link with data protection.
Yeah, in regards to safety, we have still a poll going on, which is about your opinion on whether service robotics is currently mature enough already to be widely used. And so far, as I see, 25% three people are thinking that it's quite mature enough, and 69%, which is 9 words, say that maybe some more development is needed, but of course, I think it would depend on a specific area of application. So,
thank you. And now we'll give the floor to our last speaker, Amy van Weinsberg, for presenting ethical aspects of the question of today.
Before we continue with our expert discussion, like a little bit later.
You have the floor.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm starting my timer to make sure that I stick within the 12 minutes. I won't go. So as said, my name is Professor Dr. Amy van Weinsberg. I am the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. I am also the Director of the Institute for Science and Ethics. This is at the University of Bonn in Germany. I was asked to speak today about ethics and service robots, and so I thought just before I get into that topic, I wanted to say from my background, from my academic background, before I went into ethics, I was actually working at a robotics institute in Canada at CSTAR, Canadian Surgical Technologies and Advanced Robotics. And I was part of a team where we were training and teaching surgeons how to use surgical robots. So my ethical insights are very much aimed at how do we incorporate ethics into the design process and the implementation of this technology. So it's not what some people refer to as armchair philosophy. Now moving forward, in order to talk about the ethics of service robots, I also think it's important for me to say something about what ethics is. And now depending on who you ask, you may receive a different answer. So some ethicists might say that ethics is really about understanding right action, theory of right action. How do we know when an action is right or wrong or good or bad? Others might tell you that it's about understanding individuals and character traits. How can we say when a person is good or bad or right or wrong? Yes, but what I think is really useful in this conversation of the ethics of service robots is for us to look at a particular kind of or formulation of ethics, which is ethics is the study of the good life, what it is, how we can achieve it. And now within this broad umbrella, this broad conception of what ethics is, we use the language of values and human rights, understand what the good life is, but also to understand whether or not people are actually able to achieve the good life. So we have values like privacy, safety, purity, dignity, and this is how we evaluate. If those values are being threatened, then someone's ability to achieve the good life is also being threatened. If they are being flourished and supported, then their good life is also being supported and whatnot. Now, the ethics of robotics and artificial intelligence is then looking at how we can actually evaluate this technology according to its impact on these values, according to its impact on the good life of individuals. Now, it's also important for me to say that ethics is not just a checklist. It is not just one moment in time where you say, does this technology affect an individual's human dignity? No, ethics is an ongoing, critical reflection. As we experience new technologies, as we have more experience with one technology, our ethical analysis will change, it will evolve, it will mature. That means that as we have more experience with robots and artificial intelligence, we may uncover new ethical issues that we hadn't thought of before, or we may prioritize them in a new way from how we had originally thought about them. Something else that's really important is that ethics is often the starting point for the creation of policy. So I say that to make sure that we understand these are two different fields that we're talking about. Both are necessary. So I'm not here to say we don't need policy and regulation, we only need ethics. I'm not saying that. We need both, and ethics is meant to be a tool to help uncover what it is we need to regulate. Going back to this idea, though, of the fact that ethics is this continuous process, when we're talking about the ethics of artificial intelligence and robotics, we also need to understand that we're not just talking about the creation of a product, and then what are the ethical issues? No, the ethics of robotics and AI is really looking at the different ethical issues that occur at each moment in the life cycle of the creation of that product. That means that there could be different ethical issues earlier on in the design than there are from the use. So if we think about this early on in the design process, kind of ethical issues in question that we're starting to think about have to do with the design choices that are made by engineers. And one example is how diverse is the design team, right? Because the lack of diversity in the design team usually plays out in the kind of product that is being made. It's not accessible for other individuals. They don't know how to use it, or they're not interested in using it, depending on whether or not they were thought of as the product was being made. There are also other ethical issues later on in the design process, like how the technological artifact is implemented or how it is used, who has access to it, who has a choice to actually be exposed to AI or to use AI. Now, in the same way that Dr. Catano raised this idea that we need to be much more specific about the kind of service robot that we're talking about in order to create policy or regulation, I would also say we need to take very seriously to the distinction that Susan was talking about, this difference between AI and robotics, one being embodied and the other being software and not necessarily needing to be embodied. And there are different ethical issues depending on which one of these technologies we're talking about. So with artificial intelligence, we have the canonical ethical concerns, the ones that we're hearing a lot about these days, and they have to do with biases in the training data. So when historical data is used to train, to teach an algorithm, often this historical data is full of the cultural stereotypes and biases that exist in our culture. And so by using this data to train the algorithm, we exacerbate these stereotypes. And this is a problem when we're talking about the value of fairness and the value of dignity, right? So there's an impact on the ability for individuals to experience the good life as these technologies are used more pervasively, as we continue to exacerbate cultural stereotypes and discriminatory practices. Another example of an ethical issue related to artificial intelligence has to do with a particular methodology of AI, which is machine learning. And oftentimes we hear in the machine learning discourse that it's not possible for the developer to even know all of the rules that are generated by the system in order to create an output. This is when we have the conversation about the black box, the opacity of the algorithm. And this is a very important ethical concern because then we are left with the question, who is responsible when something goes wrong? So we just heard in Stephen's talk, right? He's concerned with liability issues. And what do you do when you're in a situation where you have a technology and the developer says, I could not predict that the technology would do that? right? So we have a question, do we want to use these kinds of technologies in society? And under what conditions is it acceptable to use that kind of a technology in society? Now, ethical issues related to robotics in general, right, have to do with this human-robot interaction. And again, as Stephen said, he said, many of the robots are really cute, they look like a teddy bear, they're meant to interact with you in a certain way. And there are a lot of ethical questions looking at, are we worried about deceiving people, making people think that the robot is capable of doing things that it can't do, or that it's capable of being your friend, or you should even consider it anything like a friend. We are also worried about the psychology of persuading people. It is possible that robots are being made to look a certain way so that they nudge the behavior of users. And this, again, we're talking about the impact on individuals' dignity when robots are being used in this way. So those are two very broad, separate issues when we're looking at the distinction between the two technologies, AI and robotics, but there are issues that are common to both. The first one, I would say, has to do with how we are perceiving the impact of this technology. We've heard a lot in the other talks about, evaluating the human and the robot. And I think it's really important, no matter if we're talking about AI or robotics, that we think bigger. It's not just about the micro interaction between a person and a system. Now, when robotics enters into a sector, it changes the entire sector. If we think about robots in the healthcare space, the delivery robots, for example, they deliver sheets and medications throughout the hospital, the helpmate, the tug robot, they change the way that the financial system is structured. They change the kind of education that people have to have when going into a nursing role. They change what competence means, right? If you don't make the same time speed as the robot, are you as competent as the robot? These are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about. Ethical issues on the broad scale. And just like Stephen said, we need technology assessments. I absolutely agree. We need ethical technology assessments that take this larger picture into consideration. The second large issue that I want to put on the record has to do with the sustainability and the environmental impact of robotics and artificial intelligence. There's not enough conversation about this today. When we're talking about AI, we must consider the carbon emissions of training and tuning these algorithms and using these algorithms. When we're talking about robotics, we must begin to talk about the electronic waste. Is the robot being recycled? Is there a plan for that? What kind of materials are being used for the robot? Is there any percentage of recycled plastic? These are the things that we must talk about now to prevent another disaster in the very short future. And this is a human rights issue, because electronic waste has ruined the water and the soil in so many vulnerable demographics. We are threatening the dignity and the ability for people to live a flourishing life in countries of our own and also outside. Now, in my last 1 minute, I just wanted to also point to some specific ethical issues related to service robots in the professional, also in the personal space. The reason why I wanted to do this is I was listening to Suzanne's quote about how AI has the potential to rehumanize work. And it wasn't her quote, it was, yes, it wasn't hers, the names were on there. Anyway, I want to push back on this because there's also an assumption or a hypothesis that it won't go that way, that there will be an emotional impact on workers. They will have a kind of chilling effect. Their performance is being watched all the time. Will they change their performance in order to meet the metrics that is set by the system? Will they have the ability to change or to challenge the computerized decision, or will they be just sort of stuck with what the computer says? We're also seeing already in the United States that workers are starting to feel the effects of working alongside a robot. And I don't mean in the industrial context, I mean in a shopping mall. That workers who are working beside a robot that is stacking the shelves are already feeling like their movements have become more robotic by sheer virtue of working beside the robot and sort of measuring themselves against the robot. So we're seeing a pushback against this idea that robots will rehumanize. And what's important about this is that we have to understand using robotics and artificial intelligence in society is a social experiment right now. We don't know exactly what the outcomes will be. We just know we're moving forward with this technology. We need to be clear about what the risks are. We need to measure the risks, and we need to be transparent about the outcomes of doing these measurements. So in closing, I just wanted to stress the environmental concerns of these technologies. We must have this as a part of the conversation, and we need policy and regulation to help us govern this experiment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Van Weinsberg, for this excellent presentation, which clarifying that ethics is a dynamic and continuous process, and also is an important complement, and there is a complementarity with the regulation, between regulation and ethics.
Yeah, and based on our polling results, I see that 0% think it's only like ethical framework is sufficient on itself. So people think that laws and policies also should play a role here. So that's quite interesting. And for me, as perhaps now it would be an opportunity to proceed to an expert discussion, which we have planned, maybe. So based on what you have just said, Dr. Van Weinsberg, what do you think, maybe in terms of concrete use cases, concrete applications of service robotics, what do you see as the most problematic ones, and maybe as opposed to some others which are, as of today, are more beneficial? You've mentioned some examples, but maybe you could develop your thought further, and maybe other speakers would also comment. You are
sure.
on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself, yeah. Yeah, so I think for me, I have this general concern about sort of robots in general and the kind of materials that we're using to make them and how they're being recycled. So I would say that that is the greatest concern that I want to put on the table, and just the sheer fact that we're not talking about it. We never have those conversations. But in terms of a specific application, where I see there being the most threat right now to the good life of individuals is in these professional service robots that are in the warehouse, in the workplace setting, that are sometimes embodied, so sometimes the actual robot, but sometimes you're working against an algorithm that is telling you, you know, what the amount of time or when you can take a break or that kind of thing. And so in certain instances, the AI or the robot has become the boss, and there's very few opportunities or ways of actually challenging those decisions. And I think it's hidden right now, right? We all order our deliveries, and we don't understand that there are robots working alongside humans behind that. And we need to protect those people who are providing a great service to us.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Dr. Bieler, you are willing to also to comment, because your point of view has been a little bit in opposition. So something to your previous statements. So in regards to threats and opportunities for service robotics.
I think I also had it in my initial statement, but I wanted to once again point out we need to really identify critical applications, or maybe parts of the application, as Amy just said. If we're starting to make humans compete with robots, and robots starting to be the speed driver and pushing humans in a less pronounced or less important role, or forcing robots to people to speed on and work as fast as robots, that is definitely wrong, and we need to regulate, or either by rules of ethic, or if that's not possible, we also need the appropriate regulation that brings the humans in a better position. And actually, as I said before, the robots should be the tools and not the bosses of the people. That's important.
Thank you very much. And perhaps now I have a question for Dr. Kitano. As he have a practical background on this question, do you see an ethical question while developing robotics technology?
Well, yeah, obviously, like a robot, nowadays will be embedded with the AI system, like a visual recognitions and, all kind of things. So like, anything that actually will be the issue in like, face recognition, visual recognition, or other ethical AI issue will be in robotics as well. That's really, pretty much like common. But at the same time, if I mentioned like, the concern about logistics, or like autonomous driving, I think the situation would be dramatically different, depends on the society. Like, for example, like, in Japan, we have like a very, very serious labor shortage. Okay, so like, all the people in a warehouse want robot. They want a robot because like, they are completely overloaded. They need the help by the robotic system. Or like even an industrial robot, when they actually install new industrial robot, they put a nickname to the industrial robot, some cute nickname. And then they make it the pal, like make it the companions. Like, it's a cultural difference, maybe. Like, I think in Japan, at least, like, we don't really worry about robot being the boss. We consider robot to be the nice, cute companion and help them. And otherwise, they have to do too much. And, for the logistics, I think there's a great opportunity for help people because of the labor shortage we are facing right now. And then, autonomous driving with a little bit tricky one because that will definitely will going to be the next big wave. That's way more complicated because it's an open, complex environment, as I mentioned. And then the question is, what happened with any accident, products manufacturer going to take out liability or like, and then, the issue is the difficulty lies in the fact that this urban structure is not designed for the autonomous driving. If every car running there is autonomous driving, it's not going to be the issue because it's a mixture of the human driving, autonomous, that makes things complicated. So like, what I'm proposing for like a metropolitan Tokyo government is like, if you have to build a new city area, which they're going to do in Tokyo Bay, is okay, let's make everything autonomous and no human driver because human driver is risky. And then if any human driving car is going into the area, they have to be separate place because they are risky things. Okay, so like that kind of thing is like we probably have to, have like some sort of game changer. At the same time, if you the local area outside of Tokyo, because of the population reduction as an aging society, for example, like, you can't really get taxi driver in a spot. Like you have to wait 30, 40 minutes, even 1 hour to get the taxi cab because like a driver is not in the village and you have to call from the nearby village to actually, get the taxi driver there. Like then if you have like autonomous driving, things can be solved. And then in that kind of village, very elderly person driving a car, which is very dangerous, because of cognitive capability, physical capability loss. So I think like value and then a risk would really depend on how you deal with the system and the social situation. So we really have to take care, like all the differences. We can't really take it in a one shot.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kitana. And I think we have a question from the chat, which we can put to the expert, which would read like, doesn't putting robots on the market as gadgets, while presenting as something revolutionary, discredit the subject? So I would even clarify or extend the question from the audience in this sense. So sometimes we see the functionality of robots misrepresented in terms of like the actual functionality is not there, but it's over advertised. It's like we see sometimes with some autonomous or semi-autonomous driving cars. And in some instances, I would argue, for example, we have an opposite problem where, for example, people do not get the awareness, do have their awareness and the understanding that, for example, the system which is interacting with them is constantly recording, analyzing their behavior, has overall a much higher capacity to use that information for some purpose which the person does not know about. So do you see also this kind of problem? I would ask this extended type of question also. Maybe first I will try to ask Dr. Van Weinsberg and then give the opportunity also to you, Dr. Kitana and Dr. Biller. Please.
Thank you. Yeah, if I can also pick up, I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Katana was saying about the cultural differences. And I think to add to what he said there, when you look at our pop culture, right, you know, you have Astro Boy who saves the planet, and we have Terminator who destroys everyone. But what's interesting about that is also that we have trained people to be scared of robots, and then we say, but now work with them in the factory. You know, so there's also this weird psychology behind what it is that we're doing. So I believe that that requires some further, you know, some thought and reflection. But this is also where diversity comes in, right? You know, how wonderful it would be to have a German team and a Japanese team talking about this at the same time and exploring the differences. If you're interested, we can follow up. But the question was about, you know, how they're advertised and whatnot. I think we're actually in a crucial moment right now where people do believe, especially when you see a humanoid-looking robot, a robot that looks human-like in any kind of way, that it can do more than it can actually do. You see a robot with legs and you imagine it must be able to walk, right? Otherwise, why would it have legs? You see a robot with arms and hands and it must be able to pick things up and know the difference between an egg and a cup. And that's just not where the technology, at least the commercially available technology, is at. So I think we have to be very careful about the appearance of the robot and how the appearance can raise expectations of the consumer. And not only raising expectations, but I think we should have more machine-like looking robots. I think we should, again, what Susan was saying, we should think of robots as tools. So why not design them to make them look like tools so that we are all constantly reminded that they are tools? Anyway, I hand the microphone back.
Dr. Kitano, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Dr. Kitano, you wanted to add something maybe, and then Dr. Bila.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think like it was already raised, but like you know, the shape of the robot appearance will have like a significant impact. And a very clear example is like a SoftBank's paper, which is developed by former Aldebaran Robotics. It has a kid shape, like a face, and then when they debuted that in Japanese market, they had like a beautiful demo for the interactive dialogue, which actually was not able to do actually. So like, and then because of the human shape, like people expect like even just like a, you know, iPad, like moving iPad, nothing more than that. But people expect like if you talk to this robot, able to have like intelligent dialogue. Maybe not like a really the top level human quality, but at least a kid's quality. But of course, the technology is not there. Like people are so you know, disappointed now. Actually, I think they decide to you know, stop manufacturing that and then just removing from the shop front. So I think this is like a big you know, expectation because of the shape, and then the big disappointment because of the real functionality and level of technology we have today. So I think we have to be really careful to have like expectation control, and that's a psychological thing. So I think that's really very important.
Thank you. And Dr. Bila?
Yeah, shortly would like to add as well. Yeah, we should work on, and we need much more education on what is a robot, because we are often talking something is a robot, but it actually just looks like something a science fiction tells us is a robot, but it's actually only remote controlled and so on. So there's a certain fear of robots. There is also a major overestimation of what technology can actually do. And that is very often not really communicated by the provider, the supplier, the manufacturer of the robot, but that's more a cultural or a societal problem we have. So if something is called a robot, we expect much more functionality than it actually offers. On the other hand, we often underestimate other technology we are using. For example, the smartphone. There's a lot of AI used in the smartphone, and we would just let the thing collect data, and we are not critical about that. So I think we really have to spend more efforts on education in our society, especially the weaker parts of our society, to be able to judge on that technology and see where are the dangers and where we can be a bit more relaxed about the use of technology.
Great, and to wrap up our discussion, because we don't have much time left. And this is a question to all of you, might be your advice to the policymakers, of which we have, I think, a lot of in this program, and they will be continuing their work during the CAHAI plenary later this day. What is your advice to policymakers and maybe to consumers when dealing with regulation of service robots, and when their use is concerned in the societal context? So Dr. Vila, please, then Dr. Van Weinsberg, and then Dr. Kitana.
I think we first of all have to review what regulation is already there and helping us to regulate the critical aspects of use of AI in robotics. For example, data protection regulation is there in many countries, especially in the EU. So we do not need always to create new regulation, but maybe adjust some parts of the regulation and then identify any gaps which are there, which need to be filled when introducing new technology. I think that's the most important part, to not just overregulate and do big thing on AI, limiting parts of technology that are not really critical, but would rather support the society. That's important from my perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Belo. Then Dr. Weinsberg. Yep.
Yep, so I agree with what Dr. Bieler just said, of course. I would say it is time to create regulation that prioritizes the environmental sustainability of both of these technologies, that we should have policies in place that require carbon tracking of the carbon emissions when training and tuning and using an artificial intelligence algorithm, and that companies have to be transparent about this information. Again, because we are in this experimental stage, we just don't know yet at what level we need to have a carbon cap or to restrict carbon emissions of certain sizes of models. I also think we need to strengthen the enforcement of the shipment of electronic waste to underdeveloped countries, because of course we have treaties in place for this right now, but as we have seen, they are not doing the job that they were meant to do there. So the creation of certain policies to require companies to track carbon emissions, and the strengthening of other treaties to make sure that we actually do what we said we were going to do when it comes to electronic waste.
Thank you, Dr. Van Weinsberg. Dr. Kitana, please.
Yes, I think there are three things. One is diversity, and second thing is transparency. Third one is reality. Like in terms of like diversity, I think as I mentioned, like how we want to relationship between the robot and the human, and in our society is rather different from a different country. Depends on the social situations or like a cultural acceptance. So I think we should have like a diverse approach, and which is appropriate for the each country or the region. And the transparency is that if you have to do some kind of regulations, either legally binding or a guideline, I think we should have like a good transparent reason why we're going to do that, and then case of the why, what caused this regulation to be implemented. So I think transparency is going to be very important. And third one is the reality, is when you have a robotics and you have any shape, people start fantasizing it. And this is actually what I saw in many cases as the robotics, when I build any robotics or like someone comes to robotics, people is completely diluted by the shape. So I think like again to the down to the earth reality, what this robot really able to do. Of course, like you can inflate the image, or you can actually make it more stealth. And then although it has a big potential capability, so I think it really goes to the reality check on what exactly this robot or like a device will do or is not going to do, and then I can take it from there. So I think like those 3 points in diversity and transparency and the reality check, I think those are the three key process in creating any kind of regulatory structure.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think reality check is always important. And thank you. I wish, I thank you all the experts who participated in this program today. Thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for the audience. I think if Claudia Luciani from the Council of Europe is willing to provide maybe short closing words. Claudia, you are free to take the floor if you wish. Or otherwise, I would invite everyone to.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I thought you were controlling.
Please.
I thought you were the robot, but you weren't. Thank you. I just wanted to give my great thanks to all the speakers. I just want to tell you that your points were indeed extremely insightful for the work of the CAHAI. The Council of Europe is in the business of creating legal standards, and you all provided some very interesting ways of reflecting about those. So both the axis of Dr. Kitano about the openness of the environment and the complexity of tasks I thought were extremely interesting. Likewise, the distinctions between robotics and AI, and all the useful tips about looking at environmental impact, which we're not for the moment. So I just wanted to thank you and said that all those points were absolutely insightful and duly noted. And once again, big thanks from the Council of Europe Secretariat.
Okay, thank you, Claudia, for these ending words. And we invite everyone to join our future webinars, which will continue in September. Please stay in touch. And it was a pleasure to have you with us today. It's Alexander Tulkanov and Leticia Dimanche from Strasbourg.
Thank you, everyone. And you can follow us on our social media. Follow, like the question follow.